Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Lunch and Learn session that's being delivered by Better Start Southend and hosted by us here at SAVS. These sessions are all about sharing knowledge and legacy from the Better Start programme and supporting the community in the way that we support families here in Southend, in particular early years, but also just more widely how we can all support the community and share what we all learn and do. We're very lucky to be joined by Dave from Triceratops Training today, who's going to be giving us an overview of different funding strategies that we can all use within our organisations. And if it's okay, Dave, I'm going to hand over to you to kick off the session.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. It's an honour to be invited to come along and speak with you, lovely people. I'm just going to assume that you're lovely for the purposes of this call. Yes, my name is David Page. I'm the director of Triceratops Training, which, yeah, it's got a very strange name, hasn't it? But I think we're the only UK-wide organisation that looks to provide affirming, affordable and accessible support exclusively to small charitable organizations. There are others that kind of focus on the big fellas and then, you know, do a bit of support for smalls on the side, but we know you guys face unique issues, and that's what we're trying to do. Personally, myself, I have been fundraising officially for 20 years, which is quite a long time, actually. I'd like to say man and boy, but I'm a bit older than that. So I started off fundraising with big charities, Oxfam, Care International, folks like that. But then I soon followed my heart actually to working with smaller local organisations, which I still do. And as a result of working with small organisations, I'm what's known as a fundraising generalist, which means I've been there and done that for just about all of fundraising. And hopefully that's going to stand us in a bit of good stead for today. Please do connect with us at Triceratops Training after the session today, because even if we can't help you now, maybe in the future we'll be able to. Is that enough of a sales pitch? Is that good? I think we should maybe carry on with the good stuff now, shouldn't we? So let me share my screen with you and we can go from there. Hopefully you can all see that lovely yellow introduction to fundraising slide that we've got up. Just a little bit of housekeeping first of all. We're going to go through today's session and it's going to be primarily me chatting away to you, just because we've only got an hour. If you do have questions, I would love you to ask them. Now, we've just noticed a little issue that I can't see the chat. So if you ask a question at any time and put it in the chat box, then Roger's going to keep a nice little list for us and we'll have a few minutes at the end and we can go and see what we can do about answering those questions. If I can, I will. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that as well. I don't know everything. And really asking those questions and making the most out of this session is the best way that you can get involved today. I just ask as well, if you could all just make sure your microphones are on mute. And if you can turn your camera on, could you turn your camera on? Because it makes us feel like we're all together in one room. And that's kind of nice, isn't it? Especially at lunchtime. Bit depressing eating lunch on your own sometimes, isn't it? So let's, in fact, it would be lovely if you introduced yourselves in the chat as well, just as we're maybe going through the outline of what we're doing today. And I'm sure Roger will use that as a bit of a register afterwards as well. So where are we going to go this morning then? Well, I say this morning, it's this afternoon now, isn't it? I've had my cheese and pickle sandwiches. I had ham in it as well, just to be extra fancy. So this is the path that we're going to go today. We're going to start with a brief touch on the regulations around fundraising, and then we're going to go and look into the different possibilities that are out there, broadly speaking, for you to explore in your fundraising. Then what we're going to do is we're going to move on to chat about the features of fundraising that I wish somebody had told me when I started out all those many moons ago. I was dropping into an introduction to fundraising session a few weeks ago, and And that trainer decided to go down a route of talking about budgets and, you know, risk management and target setting, which is all important, but it's a bit boring, isn't it? So I thought we would go down this softer route for this session, because I just think it's going to, well, help you to start well, as we've said here. So if you are all sitting comfortably, I think we'll begin. So let's begin by trying to keep you out of jail, which is probably quite a useful thing to avoid. There's this thing to do with fundraising, and it's called fundraising law. And fundraising law, unfortunately, is really quite complicated because, of course, we need to keep lawyers in jobs, don't we? But to help us mere mortals keep on top of things, there's this organisation called the Fundraising Regulator, and they produce this code. It's called the Code of Fundraising Practice. And this code, it doesn't tell you how to do fundraising well, but it does tell you the standards that you need to adhere to. There are general standards in fundraising and then specific standards for different types of fundraising. And we'll look at those types in a minute, and that will probably make sense to you. Now, most of this is pretty common sense, you know, looking after people's data, looking after people's dignity. Don't be, you know, underhanded and do shady things, that kind of thing. But you should definitely find time to read through it if you haven't done that already. And if you're ever in doubt in your fundraising activity, it's there for you to consult. It's written to be accessible to those who aren't fundraisers, because it's also what Joe Public would look at if they want to complain about our fundraising. So it's there for you to engage with. If you do right by the code, you won't end up in jail, and that is a good thing. So that's the regulator. That's very much where we do need to start to make you all aware of that if you weren't beforehand. Right, let's move on to some more useful stuff. So fundraising is diverse, and there's lots of different ways for you to go about it. And these different kind of ways and methodology are known really as streams, funding streams. And that's been lifted from business, actually, where you have income streams in business. We have fundraising streams in the third sector. Now, each stream has its own characteristics, its own good points, its drawbacks as well, and we're going to look at these. But just before we do, I just want to caution you to not put all of your eggs in just one basket. Now, ideally, you want 3 or 4 of these streams working together, contributing to your income. The percentages and which ones is entirely up to you. But this helps your funding to be nice and resilient. And resilient funding is going to reduce the pressure that you feel and the stress in the future. And we want to avoid that if we can. Well, I know I do. So by having more than one funding stream operating, it also keeps your fundraising being an interesting task, a diverse task, and that's much more fun than doing something that's boring. So let's just have a little look at what these streams are. So the first one is probably the most famous. And we have trusts and foundations, or grants fundraising, it's sometimes called. This is where you write off to an organization that purely exists to give away money, which must be a nice world to live in, right enough. Now, I'm pretty sure you probably know about that already, because it's a very popular method of fundraising, especially here in the UK, when we've been doing this kind of work since the 10th century. This kind of fundraising is over 1,000 years old. Because it is so popular, we come across the downside of it, which is that it is highly competitive. You might be sending off 10 applications and only getting 1, maybe 2 back that are successful. And actually, that's if you're doing quite well. So you've got the downside, which is that you're going to get people saying no to you more than saying yes, or actually in reality, they don't say anything at all and you just assume it's a no. However, the bright side of this is that you can get quite significant amounts of money in for very little effort, comparatively little effort. It still is a task to do it, more so than any of the other funding streams we're going to talk about, with the exception of one. So trusts and foundations, grant work. Then we've got statutory, is another avenue that we could go down. That's where we enter into funding agreements with government sources. So that could be the central government, it could be the Justice Department, they do funding, Education Department do funding as well, NHS, there's a lot of funding that comes through them, local councils. There is funding there, but let's not get political and talk about the state of that as well. But these kind of funding agreements tend to be quite hard to get hold of, but once you do have hold of them, they can last, which is a brilliant win. Now that's because there tends to be a lot of networking involved in getting these contracts, who you know, and all of that. I mean, it's politics that we're dipping into here as well. But if you can get them, and if you can get them to pay their invoices on time or give you the grants on time, then you can be onto a winner with statutory, that's for sure. Community is next, and community fundraising is that fundraising that you kind of automatically maybe think of when somebody says to you fundraising, and that's when your volunteers go out and do their fundraising events for you, your bake sales, your fun runs, that kind of thing. Now the hallmarks of those are that volunteers organize the events for you. That's the kind of headline. And the good side is, if you think about these volunteers, they're going to be raising money from their friends and their families. And so they're going to be talking to their friends and their families about your particular organization. And so community fundraising is pretty much second to none when it comes to actually raising the profile of your organization, especially if the volunteers who are doing these events are having a really good time as well. The downside of it, I've not yet met a charity who hasn't underestimated the amount of effort you need to put in to make this into a sustainable and significant income stream for a charity. It takes a surprising amount of effort on behalf of the charity. I'm using the term charity. If you're a CIC or maybe a grassroots organization, I'm talking about you as well. I just use the term charity as kind of catch-all for a charitable organization. Where are we going next? Events. Events, instead of the volunteers organising their own events, this is where you, as the charity, organise events for yourselves. And because of this, they tend to be a bit grander, a bit bigger. Your galas and your fundraising dinners and your tours and things like that. And because of this kind of larger nature of it, they tend to raise more money, which is a good thing. And they tend to be very good for showing off how amazing your organization's as well, which is a good thing and a benefit. The downside is they tend to cost money to put on, and they're going to sap your time away from other activities as you're spending time organizing them as well. So that's events. Then we've got individual regular giving, my favorite kind of fundraising, if truth be told. This is where we get those small regular donations coming in from Joe Public. Now that might be your monthly kind of direct debit style giving, but it could be annual gifts that come in on the back of an appeal that you write. It could be memberships if you pursue that avenue as well. The downside to individual regular giving is it takes time for the program to gather momentum. The quickest time I've ever seen it from starting to being a meaningful source of income is actually 18 months, but you may be planning 2 or 3 years ahead. So there is that time lag with the momentum, but then there's a couple of amazing wins with it. One is you get to play with and be dead creative with it, which is great fun. The second factor is it's incredibly sustainable. That's why all of the big charities are chasing you for those £2 or £3 a month gifts, because it is so sustainable and helps them plan into the future, and it can do the exact same for you. And the other benefit is when the momentum does start gathering, it's fairly simple to scale up. There's not that much difference in effort between managing 200 regular donors and managing 20,000 regular donors. The principles are all the same. The technology working in the background needs a bit of work, but apart from that, it's pretty simple to scale. So it's sustainable and it scales, which is why regular giving is so popular amongst just about every charity. Then we've got major donors. Now this technically also counts as individual giving, but it's different. So these major donors are people who can make significant gifts to your organizations. Now that doesn't necessarily, if you're a small organization, mean that they're giving millions of pounds to you. It might mean that they give you a gift of £5,000 or £2,500. It's entirely dependent on what that word significant means for your organization. But there's also another kind of catch with it. Major donors warrant a one-to-one relationship with the leadership of your organization. Now, that means that you need to trust the leadership of your organization to do a bit of fundraising for you, which might be a negative or it might be a positive for you. I don't know how you're set up. But it does take extra input, but you can get big, meaningful gifts from the back of it. I mean, I don't know the size and scale of your organizations, but if somebody wrote you a check for £5,000, I can imagine there won't be many of us who don't pop a bottle of Prosecco in celebration that evening. You know what I mean? Major donors. I was going to go on a tangent there, but I won't. I'll stick to what we're talking about. The next one, legacy giving. So legacy giving is where somebody provides a provision for your charity in their will, and genuinely it is the pinnacle of fundraising, because no higher compliment can be made to you and your organization in fundraising terms than somebody including a gift for you in their will. It's incredibly touching when somebody decides to do that, as well as those kind of, you know, lovely emotional benefits of it. The gifts can be absolutely massive. They can really be game changing. You know, tens of thousands of pounds is actually common nowadays in gifts that are left to charities via wills. I once worked with a charity. They were left a castle, which is ridiculous, and it took them 4 years to actually figure out how to sell the castle and things like that. So that was a nice problem to have for them. The problem with legacy fundraising, however, is cash flow, because the average time between somebody writing their very final will and them actually passing away, which releases the money to you, well, when I started fundraising, it was 7 years, but there's evidence now where it's actually pushing more towards 10 years. So in other words, the effort that we're putting in today, we're probably not going to see the rewards of that for a decade. But when the rewards come, oh boy, do the rewards come. In memory giving, slightly different to, it's kind of a blend between legacy and community fundraising. That's when somebody passes away and their friends or their family then have, you know, a collection at a funeral or engage in a fundraising event to raise money to give to your charity in memory, funnily enough, of the person who has passed away. That's very important if you're a hospice or dealing with palliative care. For the rest of us, it's maybe something that's a bit more of a luxury in fundraising. Number 9 is corporate fundraising, which I think it's got the wrong name, actually. Corporate fundraising, it shouldn't be called that. I think it should be called business partnerships, right? I'll tell you why. Because corporate fundraising suggests it's only corporations that you can get involved with, when that's not true. It can be anybody. Any local business can help you out. Any national business could be potentially approached for it. You know, I'm talking from, you know, your worldwide banks through to your local hairdresser, for example. And it's not just about fundraising as well. And that's a real benefit of corporate they've got so much more that they can offer you. Yes, we want those cash gifts, but they can also offer you profile raising through their own marketing efforts. They can offer you skills. I'm working with a charity at the moment, and a local marketing company has partnered with them to build them a free website. They can also offer you volunteers to do the boring things that you don't really want to ask your regular volunteers to do. They can also open doors and help you network and become part of the community. There's loads of wins there. The difficulty with corporate fundraising is these partnerships can often be one-sided. And it's more of a transactional form of fundraising. So don't walk into that unless you've upskilled yourself a bit with it beforehand, because we don't want you to fall a cropper of a bad partnership. And then the last one is earned income. And earned income is it's actually just about the largest source of income for charities across the UK. So this is income that you generate from doing your charitable activities. So it could be you're entering into a contract for delivery with a different organization. It could be that you're charging, you know, subs for the youth group that you're running. It might be you've got a cafe that you run, or a charity shop, something like that. It's where you're making a difference in the world, but you're generating the cash at the same time. It's a bit more of the entrepreneurial thinking. Counselling charity up in Glasgow is a perfect example. They charge folks £10 for an hour of counselling. Now, that hour of counselling costs the charity £50, but it means that instead of having to raise the whole £50, they're now only having to raise £40. That's an example of earned income. Sounds like a good thing, but then there's a tightrope that you need to walk. How do you continue offering your services and making them accessible and not price people out of the support that they might need? There you go. 10 different streams of fundraising, and everything, you know, with fundraising kind of fits in one of these categories or kind of blends between a couple. But that's just there to help you kind of think about, right, what options could we be pursuing? And I just want to maybe challenge some potential misconceptions here. There seems to be a traditional view, especially among trustees of organisations, that the way you do fundraising is through trusts and grants. It might have been in the 1980s, but it's not anymore. Times have certainly changed. I've cobbled together these statistics from a few different sources: Charities Aid Foundation, NCVO, Charity Digital, different sources. And it seems to me that trusts actually only account for about 20% of all the money that comes into charities from the UK, in the UK rather. Only 20%, so £1 in every £5 raised. Of that, 0.5% comes from the National Lottery, who are not the biggest funder, but are a significant funder, especially of smaller organisations. The one that really caught my eye was that whole idea of earned income. Now, that blends slightly with statutory income when you're delivering contracts for the NHS and education departments and things like that. But half of the money that comes into UK charities, from one study that I saw, is from that kind of entrepreneurial activity. That's something very interesting to think about. The one that's going to grow most, corporate fundraising. I'll put my house on it. It's definitely going to grow. So I'm not suggesting, by the way, that you only have 20% of your income from trusts. You work in your own unique context. I just wanted to paint a bit of a picture to allow you to see the landscape that's going on behind. Now, these slides are going to be made available to you through SAVS, and I've just got a little summary here slide for you to have a quick reference. I'm not going to go through this because we just have for you to refer to. I've also got another document actually that I'll send through to SAVS to have and hold, that goes into a bit more detail on all of these different funding streams, should you want to refer to that after the session, or if you're watching the recorded session, pop an email through to SAVS and I'm sure they'll figure out some way of getting it to you for free. I offer it on my fundraising strategy course that I run with Triceratops Training. Okay, now let's get into these things that I wish I had been told when I was started out in fundraising. Now, when it comes to fundraising, it's all about relationship of the charity to the donors, relationships of the donors to your end communities or beneficiaries or causes that you're working with. the stronger that the relationships are that you build, the stronger and more reliable your fundraising is going to be. Genuinely, nobody made it that simple to me when I was starting. On the slide here are some key kind of aspects or elements of healthy relationships, and I'm sure you can read through that and you can agree. And we want to foster these as best as we can with our donors. And when I say our donors, I mean, you know, Emma, who gives us £5 a month, and I mean Sandra, who works for this business and gives us loads of money, or, you know, Hugh, who works for this foundation, who maybe is one of our main funders. Relationships flow through all of those streams of fundraising we've just talked about. The challenge of growing a fundraising program is actually how you can do this as more and more funders come and donors come through your door. But don't worry, we're not going to think about that just now, and there's plenty of help out there should you, or when hopefully you face those issues. Now, as you read through these, I don't know if it occurs to you, but it occurred to me that what we're really seeking here is a two-way relationship with donors, because the best relationships that we have with other folks are two-way. However, the reality is maybe that is what we are desiring, but in real life, the relationship's going to be more one-way from us to the donor. But if they're keeping us going financially, we're not necessarily allowed to complain about that, are we? What this kind of whole idea, though, of a two-way relationship means is that we don't just consider our donors to be walking checkbooks for us. It means that when we thank them, we really mean thank you. And when we see them, we consider them an essential part of our team as well. Of course, and in that, we need to show them what their donation has actually achieved. That is really crucial in building up these relationships. And the fun bit about fundraising is that you can build these relationships in ways that are only limited by your own imaginations. You can write, you can record videos, you can meet people, you can show people, you can sing and you can dance if you want. The world is your oyster. Just be aware of your own limitations and your own skill sets. We're not looking for karaoke here, unless that's something that sounds like a lot of fun. It does actually, doesn't it? In bringing kind of this session together, it occurred to me as well that there's no fixed rule book in fundraising. When I first started, it was in a very rigid structure, and I thought there was a fixed rule book. But you know what? There isn't. What there is people who are willing to put their nose to the grindstone and work. Sometimes things work globally for all charities, and that's kind of best practice, and we'll be talking about some of that in a little while. But you're likely going to find the most success, especially in relationship building, when you use your own unique and confident approach that is you. But let's talk about just something that does work, and how you use it, I guess, is up to you. But that is the whole idea of stories. Humans, apart from maybe music, love stories more than anything. I watched a show recently on Neanderthals, who were around about 100,000 years ago, and there was evidence from then that they shared stories. Stories are an essential part of our human existence. That's why movies are blockbusters, even though they're all kind of the same. That's why we read books. It's also why we gossip, actually, because we love a bit of a juicy story, don't we? And there's a real power in sharing stories. And it's a power that we can use fantastically in fundraising. You see, stories, they have heroes and they have champions, don't they? They've got the evil people and the evils of the world, and they've got baddies, don't they? They've got struggles, they've got, triumphs, they've got learning points for us as well. They've also got laughs and tears. We've got all of those as charities. And if we can weave a narrative, we can create some of the most wonderful stories, you know, stories of life from a position of death, or, you know, hope from despair, futures from dead ends, that kind of thing. And we can tell stories with words, we can tell stories with pictures, we can tell stories with facts and statistics even, a whole assortment of methods that fall between as well. We can tell stories with our eyes as we talk to people about the work that happens with our organizations. A lot of my one-to-one support of charities at the moment, it kind of falls in two halves, and one half of it is around helping organizations create and discover their own impact that they create. And we do this by telling the story of the charity, telling the story of the people who come through the charity, or the communities that are embraced by these organizations. Donors and funders absolutely love this stuff. And it's something that I think is only going to increase because of that beautiful blend of creativity and professionalism that actually isn't really done many other places. And when you're thinking of stories as well, think of the different angles from which stories can be told. First-hand stories, second-hand stories, stories that look from the outside in or the inside out. This kind of thought of different angles and maybe intertwining different stories into one big story, as you know, the big large novels do, it helps keep our stories and our messaging fresh. It helps keep it engaging as well, and it adds a layer of authentic quality, which makes people trust us, or which helps people to trust us, should I say. So when we're thinking about that whole idea of building relationships through our fundraising, stories are a key tool for us to use. In fact, the next time you engage with another charity, look for the stories that are involved in their communications and think about how they've been created. Also, maybe think about how they make you feel. As in fundraising, we want stories that inspire us and make us feel like we're making the world, or helping make the world, a better place. All of the best stories inspire readership, those who are reading it. And we want to inspire people to take action. Of course, take action to donate. But what about taking action to volunteer their time? What about taking action to sign a petition to send to the local council to say, stop cutting these essential services that we're providing? There's no silver bullet when it comes to inspiring. And that's because of something else that I wasn't told about when I started fundraising. Different charities have different audiences, and they react differently to different forms of communication. They have different triggers for inspiration, or thresholds for inspiration, if you want to use a different way of looking at it. I even met somebody once who is purely gave to charity on the statistics that that charity was achieving. Only one person in 20 years that I've met who does that, but still they like that. And I think what is the main point, or the main takeaway about inspiration, goes back to that two-way relationship. We need to figure out a way to listen to our audiences, to our donors, to our funders, and find out what resonates with them, find out what works with them, what doesn't work with them. Find out maybe what else would they like to know, what else would they like to see. You know, some of the best insights in fundraising comes from lifting up the phone and just talking to a donor actively, pursuing that two-way relationship. I'm working with a charity at the moment, helping them with a bit of grant funding. That's not what we intended to do, but they've got an important application coming up, so I'm involved in that. And yesterday, they picked up the phone and called the trust, and they found out loads of useful guidance that isn't on the website, that's going to stand them a much better chance of getting a grant than if they hadn't bothered picking up the phone. And it's the same with your corporate partners. It's the same with your regular monthly donors as well. Finding out what they want from you and giving it to them, but then adding a bit of magic on top. Giving them a little bit more, a little sprinkling that is going to keep their donations coming to you while they stop giving to the charity down the road, around the corner in that other part of the world that we don't talk about. Now, that little bit of sprinkling of magic, it could be as simple as sending them an email or a birthday card on their birthday. It could be as simple as just providing robust and professional feedback on what their gifts have actually achieved in the communities or with the folks that you're working with. It could be as complex, actually, as sending them an invitation to serve as a trustee. Keep this idea of like magic. What fairy dust can you sprinkle on it? What hundreds and thousands can you put on top of the icing of the cupcake? As you're thinking about managing donors and building those relationships, because if you can surprise your donors, they're going to be delighted. And that's what we really want, especially in smaller organizations. Big charities find it really hard to delight their general supporter base. The super wealthy people who give them £100,000 gifts, oh, they'll delight them, no problem. But those regular folks who maybe give £500 over the course of a year, big charities won't touch them. Small organizations, local organizations, we really can. Little bit of inspiration maybe around how I've seen charities sprinkling fairy dust on relationships. There's one charity I worked with, we wrote a appeal. And we had an annual appeal that went out, and there was one year we gave the reins to a 15-year-old who did it all. She was a young person who come through the project and was now a volunteer, so she could speak from the two different angles. We had to correct some of the worst grammatical errors there, but we left it really raw, and it was a very successful appeal because it was going straight from the horse's mouth. That was a little bit of magic dust that we sprinkled over it. My Name Doddy Foundation has been in the press quite a lot, especially if you're into the world of rugby. They use sporting celebrities to share the stories of MND, which is the health cause that they're trying to sort out, which inspires people to give because it's people they recognize. That's the magic dust that they sprinkle on it. There's a link on this slide that I've got up just at the moment, which is a YouTube video. It's a few years old now, but it's created by Genes for Genes. Do you remember them? They were big about 20 years ago, but they're still going. And what they did is they've sprinkled the magic dust because they just gave the sister of one of the young people that they work to benefit a phone and asked her to do a video diary. Now, we're not going to watch that now because we don't have time, but I've got the link on this slide for you, and I'd encourage you to watch that and have a tissue handy because it is brilliant. It's one of the best pieces of fundraising video that I've ever come across. One more. There's a charity in Ghana that does like a community farm, and they send tiny little vials of dirt from the farm back to the donors in the UK who help get that up and running. So simple, so cheap, but so effective because it's that little sprinkling of magic dust. So inspiration, that's what we're after. And that comes from doing our jobs really well, but it also comes from those little hundreds and thousands that we're sprinkling around. And the final element in what we're talking about just now is ethics. Now, if you're in sales, ethics and considering ethics can sometimes be a bit of a straitjacket. That's not the case in fundraising. There's a lot of transferable skills between fundraising and sales, right enough. But in fundraising, it's actually a very useful tool to make our work more effective. So we think of it in a few ways. Let's think first of guilt. Okay. So you might have come across the quite crass term of poverty porn. So that's a term for those appeals and adverts that you'll see on the telly and through your doorstep, that parade poor people or poor animals before the cameras in a quite jarring and actually borderline exploitative way. And the idea behind that is that you see that and you're guilted into action. Now, that's not ethical fundraising. It's not entirely illegal, but it's not ethical. But the kicker is, it's also not effective. Guilting people into making gifts doesn't really work. It might get you a 10 or 20 pound single one-off donation, but it's never going to start a relationship. It used to, it doesn't anymore. What's far better and more effective, and there's numerous insight into this, is if you champion the dignity of the folks that you're working with, or the communities and the causes that you're working with, because people don't want to give handouts. People want to give because there is an effective solution. And by championing the dignity and by making the folks that we work with the champions of their own success, that's exactly what we can do. There's this thing called the granny test that I do. You can go to the fundraising regulator and read all of that, but I tend to go by the granny test. This is something that I've made up. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. If you're doing a fundraising activity, maybe you're writing a story or you're asking somebody for money, the granny test is where you imagine that your granny or another dearly loved and vulnerable individual is the subject of that fundraising action if it was done by another charity. Would you be happy if somebody talked to or about your granny in that way? If the answer is yes, you're probably fine. If it's no, then you should really be thinking about what you are doing. We're running a wee bit short on time, so let's just quickly burst over and think about what we need to do if we want to be starting well. Fundraising is really rewarding if it's done right, but it's not easy, and you can quickly spiral into stress if you're not careful. So the first thing is strategy. You need to spend a bit of time planning out what you're going to be doing. Planning out over the next 12 months, of course, but actually thinking a bit further ahead than that is going to be useful for you as well. And these bullet points on this slide very much are the bullet points or the section titles that you might want to go through should you be wanting to pull together a fundraising plan, a fundraising strategy, if you want to be grand. So your executive summary, we actually finish with that rather than start with it. It's the last thing you write, but it's basically a conclusion that you keep at the start. The goals, we need to set those overall funding goals. So that big number that you need to achieve over the next year, that needs to go in there. But you might also have a goal like we want to employ our first fundraiser, or we want to diversify away from trusts. Big kind of bird's eye view goals is next. And then you go and have a look at your different options available, and you can use the details about the different fundraising streams to inform you on that. And then the next section is where you justify the actions that you're going to take forward. We're not going to do community fundraising because we've got a really weird cause and nobody's ever heard of it, for example. Or we're not going to do major donor fundraising because we don't know anybody who's got any money because we live and work in a disadvantaged area. But we are going to do X, Y, and Z and explain why. That's the justification. Then, yeah, set out a work plan, targets as well. And what are you going to hope to achieve for each of those little elements that you're pulling together? What is it, or when is it, sorry, that you're going to do these things? We're going to do a fundraising dinner in the summer because then we can do it outside, hopefully. And that will save us having to hire a hall. And that's a great idea. Budgets, risk assessments, they need to be in there as well. But just taking yourself away from the working norm and just thinking, right, what could we do? And then changing that what could we do into what are we actually going to do? That's about planning, and that's going to save you stress, and it's actually going to save you time down the line as well. And when you're planning, have a little think about how you can share the load. There's this concept in fundraising, which is it's called whole organization fundraising. That's where you've got somebody who is responsible for the fundraising in your organization, but everybody else gets involved. Staff, key volunteers, trustees as well. And it's a huge win if you can get your organization ticking with something like this. I worked with a charity and they had a looming 10% hole in their budget. And it needed to be filled within 18 months. It was a bit of an issue. Otherwise, a couple of staff were going to lose their jobs, or a few staff actually would be losing their jobs. And it was panic stations, but they brought in a external consultant. That was before I started doing training consultancy. And he told them very abruptly what the solution to this problem was. He said, you have 50 staff. It was a medium-sized organization we worked with. And he said, all of these 50 staff have friends and they have family. So even if there's only 10 people that they would count as friends and family, that's 500 contacts we can be asking for money. Reality was people knew way more than 10 people. And so the field was ripe, as the old saying would go. And that was the solution to the problem. Every staff member was asked, or targeted actually, to run a little fundraising event with their friends and family. 2 staff didn't like it and actually handed in their notice, but there we go. But everybody else got on board. Some of them did them together. I did a big cycle ride from Inverness to, no, sorry, from Fort William to Inverness, and I texted my wife goodbye halfway through because I thought it was going to kill me. Other people just did like little coffee mornings, or somebody did a 24-hour dance-a-thon, which I thought was a bit much, but they loved it. What actually happened was that charity didn't just fill that 10% gap. They actually raised £300,000, and then that was put into annual. So they actually boosted their income significantly through doing that. And kind of selling point was they didn't put any financial target against it. They didn't have any financial expectations of these staff and trustees doing things. It was simply, could you please do something and have fun whilst you're doing it? And it raised loads of cash. Sharing the load. There's various ways of doing it, but that's the best way I've seen. Getting your volunteers and your staff and your trustees especially involved as well. And then there's the whole idea of getting out and about. Fundraising is not actually done from behind a laptop. It needs to be sometimes, and there's no denying that. But getting out there and talking to people, getting involved with local groups, is going to be, going to arm yourself and equip yourself to do fundraising really well. If you're a person of faith and you belong to a faith community, they will probably love to know how you're making the world a better place. If you're not, you could join a gym, get involved in the local community council, volunteer at a local school maybe. There's lots of different ways of just getting out and meeting people, and that's part of the fun of fundraising. Now, sometimes for some of us who are introverts, I'm actually an introvert, getting out and meeting people, you don't know where to begin with that. Why don't you begin with your own friends, your own family, and then maybe your neighbours? That's a great way to go about it. We had a barbecue in our street, not for any fundraising purpose, but I just said to everybody in the street, because we had sun a couple of days ago, which is a miracle, why don't you come around for a barbecue? I've got the coals, bring your own food, bring your own drink. And all of the neighbours came around because they were looking for somebody to connect to. Getting involved in things is a brilliant way of fundraising, as well as sitting behind the desk and writing these wonderful appeals and applications that you will be doing. There's loads of help out there for you. Fundraisers tend to be a very friendly bunch. Big charities, not quite as much, because they tend to be career-focused individuals. But in smaller organisations, as you'll know, being part of the third sector community in Southend, folks are friendly, aren't they? They want to help out. You're not competing against each other. You're peers. You want each other to succeed. So talk to each other, network with each other. If you need more help, go and see Roger over at SABS. Come and see me at Triceratops Training. See what we can do to help you as well. And I've launched a community online that's slowly gaining traction called Small But Mighty. You're more than welcome to come and join with us. I've got some consultants that are sitting on there, but it's a community just to ask questions purely for those involved with small charities. Charity Excellence Framework is brilliant for you. And of course, you've got the bigger institutions that are out there as well. And that brings us kind of to the end nicely with 10 minutes to go. So just a little recap of where we have just been. So we started off thinking about the fundraising regulator, you know, keeping you out of jail. Can you do fundraising from behind bars? We probably could if you were clever enough, but anyway. We started with that, and then we looked at those different streams of fundraising to hopefully cast your minds wide about the potential avenues for support that you could go down. And then we thought about the different elements that I wish I had been told when I started fundraising. The chief one of which was, it's all about building relationships. And that's a lovely, lovely thing, which is why fundraising is a lovely, lovely thing as well. Plus, we're making the world a better place. Excellent. Please do connect with me via Triceratops Training. My direct email address is david@triceratopstraining.co.uk. Any thoughts, any or anything really, please do get in touch. I love it when folks do get in touch. Now, I haven't been able to see the chat box for any questions coming through. If any have come through, maybe Roger, you could share it. But if anybody on the call live with us just now wants to ask any questions, we have a bit of time to play with. So please do ask away.
We don't have any in the chat, so we can, yeah, come to anyone in the room. Paul is typing.
Paul is typing. Paul, if you would find it easier to unmute yourself, please feel free. But also no pressure.
That's probably a good idea, is it? I'm sure I can talk quicker than I can type. I currently run our website. I mean, my charity started out of a Facebook group and me blogging about it, and
amazing.
It's grown to, well, we've only just formed a charity for the last year or so, but we realise there's a great opportunity for doing some of the things that you've said in donors, just our members doing one-off donations and also the regular. But when I look at, I've had put PayPal links and Just Giving links and things like that, but they always tend to take you away from the website and they don't look terribly nice. But I see other websites where you have a form and they give you a whole bunch of options, and I've seen Donor Box and Give WP. You got any advice on those? I know it's a little bit out of this, but is that okay?
I love that question. Very, very practical question. So I'm not going to tell you which supplier to go with because they're not sponsoring me. So when it comes to digital donations, there's a concept known as friction. Okay, so I don't know when the last time you bought anything from Amazon was. Hopefully it was years ago because it's a terrible company. But I had an emergency and I needed a HDMI cable day before yesterday, and I needed it this morning. So I bought a HDMI cable from Amazon, and I did that by searching, by clicking once and then pressing buy now, and that was it. That is super low friction, because I didn't have to put much effort into buying that. I didn't have to go to Argos, which I usually do for my electric stuff. I could just click on it. And when we're thinking about how we process donations, we also want to be thinking about how low friction, how easy we can make it for people. So the first question is, you know, when you've got your form that you might need to fill in, or that they fill in on the Just Giving page, do you really need all of that information, or do you just need enough to collect that donation and the email address so you can then start building up the relationship via an email? So when you're going out having a look, I'm a big fan of Go Cardless. Actually, they pair up with Stripe very well for card payments, and there are plenty of others out there, but they make it very, very low friction. And they also make it very clear, like their branding's on it a little bit, but they keep that to a minimum because they understand that it's a bit of a jar going from a charity's website that is, you know, like yellow to this other website that's completely blue, and it's a bit strange. And one of my clients at the moment in Peterborough, they use Just Giving as their kind of regular payment portal, and it's so confusing because you say I want to donate £20, and then suddenly you get directed to this place that's all about doing fundraising events, and it's just really confusing. And most modern websites now actually have their own payment portals that you can go through. I use Squarespace for building my website, and I can do direct debits, regular card transactions. You have to pay for it a wee bit, and everything through that, and you just drag and drop. I haven't got a clue about coding and APIs and all that kind of stuff, but it's all built there for you. So yeah, when you are looking around, I don't have a specific provider to suggest, but look for that kind of low friction way, because it's been known for years that the more friction you have in making a donation, the more likely it is that somebody's not going to see it all the way through. Roger, have you got something to add to that?
Yeah, just I was going to ask Paul, is you mentioned GiveWP, which is a WordPress plugin. Is your website built with WordPress?
It is, yes.
Okay, I'd be happy to have a chat with you outside of this meeting if you want. We use a couple of different solutions across our product range, so I can give you maybe a bit of insight from that side. Yeah,
that'd be brilliant. Thank you. And can I have a follow-up question, David? You mentioned Stripe. This is the second meeting in 2 days that a person's mentioned Stripe. So is that something I should get on, or we should get? And also, what would be appropriate regular donation amounts? You mentioned some in your previous talk. You know, is £2 too low? Is £5 the lowest?
So Stripe is just one of a number of different options you've got for processing card payments. You've got WorldPay, they're probably the two market leaders right enough. So you can go and investigate those as well. You actually ask AI to recommend a few, it will probably bring a few out of the woodwork for you. For the donation amounts, if somebody gave you £2 a month, Paul, and they gave that for a year, so that's £24 a year. Let's add a bit of gift aid on that, take it up to nearly £30 a year. What would you use that £30 for?
Currently, we want to fund a leaflet design, printing and distribution.
So £30 could potentially print about 500 leaflets. Would that be about market rate? Probably. Is that exciting for people? Is that a big impact? Might be for somebody, but it might not be for others. The best thing to do is to try it. If you put out supporters with £2 a month, it's not going to make a massive dent in your budget, is it? But it might be that level that people are willing to get involved, which allows you then to start building that relationship. So in a year or two's time, you can ask them, well, you've been given £2, could you stretch it to £5? Or you've been given £2 a month, could you maybe change that to £2 a week? Because, you know, a Mars bar is £1.50 nowadays, so it's not actually that much money. And you can use that to start building up the relationship and teasing it out over time. And hopefully you'll have people that are giving to you for 30 years, increasing it on the regular as you make the world a better place. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Roger, you got your hand up again.
Yeah, I was just going to add in, I know you touched on it, David, about that corporate fundraising and the CSR and social value. Paul, for that sort of leaflet design and printing, that's the perfect thing to go to local digital agencies with and just say, can you donate 2 hours of your designer's time to put this leaflet together? You know, it's relatively low cost for them, but high impact for you. And we've seen a lot of local success by going to organizations and not asking for money, but for exactly those sorts of things, like David was talking earlier. So that could be that £2, that £30 could do the printing, and then you can kind of blag or find donations to do the design element.
And if you can say, we'll put your company logo on this leaflet and we're printing 5,000 of them to go and dish out around the place, then that's kind of a no-brainer for them. That's a massive bit of publicity, showing that they're a really lovely company. Thank you for those questions, Paul. That was really good of you to ask them. It is 2 o'clock. So I think we've got to the end of the session. Roger, will I hand over to you to finish us off?
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, David. Really useful and kind of spot on in terms of content. Yeah, learned lots of good things. I hope everyone else did too. Thank you for coming along today. We're going to be uploading the recording and some of the resources that David mentioned online so that you and others can catch up with them. But yeah, thanks for coming. We've got lots of other exciting sessions planned in, which are all available on the webpage. But we will leave you to crack on with your days, and thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, everybody.